A knock came at the screen door of room number 11 at the Camellia Motor Court on East Main Street in Chattanooga, Tennessee at 6:12 on a humid Friday morning in mid-September. The knock was three quick, careful raps with the back of one knuckle, the careful, old-fashioned three-rap pattern a Tennessee wills attorney of 42 years' practice will use at the screen door of a young woman whose family wills file he has been carrying on the strength of a small, careful Hamilton County probate court docket line item, and on the strength of a small, careful private agreement he had made with the late Mr. Galen Whitcomb at his bedside in 2017. For the 8 years between the late Mr. Galen Whitcomb's quiet passing and the morning of the Friday in mid-September. The young woman in room number 11 who had heard the three quick, careful raps from the small, careful pull-out single bed against the south wall of the small, careful one-room cabin where she had been sleeping for the past 4 months opened her dark, almond-shaped eyes, set her right hand carefully across the soft round of her 6-month pregnant belly, sat up, swung her bare feet onto the small, careful braided cotton rug at the foot of the bed, walked the 11 careful steps from the bed to the screen door, and, in her soft, cotton robe over flannel nightshirt, opened the screen door at 6:13. Standing on the small painted wooden porch in his soft cream linen seersucker suit and his small, careful, soft cream straw fedora and his soft cream and pale blue striped silk bow tie, holding in his right hand a small, soft brown leather portfolio with the small embossed gold initials TG on the front, was Mr. Thurston Glenn, 68 years old that September, of Glenn and Trapp Attorneys at Law, Tennessee Wills and Estates, of the small, careful office on Market Street 6 blocks north of the Tennessee Aquarium. He said in his soft, careful, low Southern voice, "Ma'am, forgive the hour. I would not, ma'am, on a Friday morning at 6:12, come to your screen door if the matter were not, ma'am, in fact, the matter of the 7 days. I have, ma'am, in this folio, the small, careful Hamilton County Probate Court ruling Judge Phaedra Beck signed on the small, careful private docket of Tuesday afternoon, on the small, careful repetition Mr. Kane Ledbetter filed with the assistance of his small, careful Knoxville counsel, on the small, careful matter of the small, careful marriage clause in your late father, Mr. Galen Whitcomb's 2017 will's instrument. The clause, ma'am, on Judge Beck's reading will, in the absence of the small, careful marriage by sundown of the small, careful evening of your 28th birthday, in fact, on the morning of the 22nd of September, 7 days from now, in fact, ma'am, in fact, transfer the entirety of the Whitcomb family cabin on Lookout Mountain and the entirety of the small, careful, $118,000 residual trust to Mr. Kane Ledbetter under the small, careful default provision your father left in. I am, ma'am, in this folio, here to ask you, on this Friday morning at 6:12, what in the 7 days you would, ma'am, like me to do." Her name was Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb. She was 27 years and 11 months old that Friday morning, 6 days short of 28, 6 months and 1 week pregnant with her first child, a daughter she had decided, since the second trimester ultrasound on the 7th of June, she would name June Cecily Whitcomb after her late mother, Mrs. Mercia June Whitcomb, and after her own grandmother, Cecily. She was a 27-year-old African-American woman, 5 feet and 5 inches tall, softly rounded with the small, careful late second trimester roundness of her pregnancy, with warm, medium brown skin, a faint scattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose, large, dark, almond-shaped eyes with a careful, steady watchfulness, and her thick, natural black hair pulled into a neat, low pony at the nape of her neck under a soft, pale blue cotton headscarf knotted at the back. On her left ring finger, she wore the small, thin gold ring her own grandmother had given her on her 10th birthday. On the right ring finger, nothing. She had, since the 3rd week of June, been on her own. The man whose child she carried, a small, soft, careful systems administrator at the Erlanger Medical Center named Mr. Devontae Crown had, on the morning of the third Saturday of June, walked out of the small, careful one-bedroom apartment they had been renting on Bailey Avenue and had not, in the 11 weeks since, returned a single one of Aurora's 3 telephone calls. Aurora had, 4 weeks after he had left, on the strength of a small, careful 3-month rent default notice the landlord had taped to the front door, packed a single small canvas duffel bag of her clothes, 4 small worn paperback books, and the small, careful wooden hand-carved cradle her late father had built her in 2012 and had moved into room number 11 of the Camellia Motor Court at the small, careful weekly rent of $160. The landlady at the Camellia Motor Court, Mrs. Minerva Hollis, 69 years old that September, who had been at the Camellia for 31 years, had, on the morning of the 2nd of August, on Aurora's having paid for the first week, said only, "Baby, stay as long as you need. The room, baby, is yours. Do not, baby, in the meantime, eat at the small, careful stop-and-go on Market. Eat, baby, at Mrs. Tildy Slater's diner at the corner of East Main and Holt's Claw. Tell her, baby, Minerva sent you. Tell her, baby, you need a job. Mrs. Tildy has, in 31 years, never not given a job to a young woman Minerva has sent." Aurora had, on the morning of the 3rd of August, walked the 4 blocks from the Camellia Motor Court to Mrs. Tildy Slater's diner. Mrs. Tildy Slater, 71 years old that August, who had been the cook and owner of the small, careful corner diner for 33 years, had, on Aurora's having walked in and said only, "Mrs. Slater, Mrs. Hollis sent me," looked up from the back grill, taken in the small, careful round of Aurora's 6.5-month pregnant belly, and the small, careful, steady set of her dark eyes, and had said, "Baby, the 11 to 3 lunch shift, $6.75 an hour plus tips. The tips, baby, are yours. Start Monday. Tomorrow morning at 10, baby, come back. I will, baby, give you a small, careful folded blue uniform shirt and a small, careful slim canvas waitress apron of mine. Go on home now. Sit, baby. The world will, in any event, wait for Monday." Aurora had said, "Mrs. Slater?" "Yes, ma'am." She had been, in the 6 weeks since, the 11 to 3 lunch waitress at Mrs. Tildy Slater's diner. The work paid on a typical week $248 in wages plus around $110 in tips. The Camellia Motor Court rent was $160 a week. Aurora had been, on the small, careful private accounting she kept in a small, worn blue 5-and-dime spiral notebook on the small, careful pine nightstand by her bed, putting $83 a week into a small, careful Wells Fargo Bank passbook she had opened on the morning of the 5th of August for what she had begun to think of as the June Cecily Whitcomb small, careful first 3 months of life fund. The Whitcomb family cabin on Lookout Mountain was a small, careful 3-room 1923 frame cabin on a 2-acre wooded lot at the end of the small, careful winding gravel of Sunset Rock Road, 400 feet from the small, careful overlook. The cabin had been bought by Aurora's grandfather, Mr. Vance Whitcomb. Wait, Vance was used in RRF-006. Oh. The cabin had been bought by Aurora's grandfather, Mr. Hadrian Whitcomb, in 1941 for $140 cash from a kind, soft-eyed, retired Lookout Mountain Railroad engineer named Mr. Augustus Cobb. Quincy had passed it on at his quiet 2003 passing to his only son, Galen. Galen had, in 2017, on his quiet bedside passing of pancreatic cancer at the age of 58, drafted with Mr. Thurston Glenn's careful, unhurried assistance, a small, careful Wills instrument that left the cabin and a small, careful $118,000 residual trust to his only daughter, Aurora, under one small, careful condition that Galen had, in his bedside hospice room at Erlanger, dictated to Mr. Thurston Glenn, with the small, careful unhurriedness of a 58-year-old man who had quietly observed, in the 4 years of his marriage to his second wife, Mrs. Beatrix Whitcomb, née Ledbetter, that her only son from her own first marriage, Mr. Cain Ledbetter, was a small, careful, unsteady young man whose own small, careful, unsteady appetites would, in the absence of a small, careful condition, in fact, almost certainly, find their way to Aurora's careful little cabin and her careful little trust within the small, careful first 6 months of her father's passing. The condition on the small, careful printed page of Mr. Galen Whitcomb's 2017 Will's instrument had read in Mr. Thurston Glenn's careful, old-fashioned cursive with Galen's small, careful initials in the margin. My daughter, Aurora June Whitcomb, shall, in order to take the cabin and the residual trust, be married by sundown of her 28th birthday to a man of her own choosing. Failing such marriage, the cabin and the residual trust shall pass in default to my stepson, Mr. Cain Ledbetter, with my regrets to Aurora, and my prayers that she will, in any event, find her own way to a kind man. Mr. Galen Whitcomb had not, on the morning he had dictated the condition, intended the condition to be a cruelty. He had intended the condition on the small, careful private logic of a 58-year-old hospice patient to be a small, careful mechanism that would, on the practical assumption that Aurora was, at 20, a small, careful, steady young woman who would, in any event, be in a kind, careful marriage by 28, harmlessly transferred to her, on her 28th birthday, the cabin and the trust without his stepson's involvement. The condition's small, careful mechanism had not, in 2017, anticipated Mr. Devontae Crown. The condition's small, careful mechanism had not, in 2017, anticipated the small, careful third Saturday of June of this year, on which Mr. Devontae Crown had, with the small, careful rented U-Haul of a small, careful three-bedroom on Hickson Pike, to which he had moved with his new partner, Miss Marilyn Vale, removed from the small, careful one-bedroom apartment on Bailey Avenue every careful piece of furniture except the small, careful wooden hand-carved cradle Galen had built Aurora in 2012. Mr. Cain Ledbetter, Aurora's stepbrother, 33 years old that September, who had, since his mother, Mrs. Beatrix Whitcomb Ledbetter's quiet passing of complications from a stroke in 2021, been working as a small, careful contract handyman in the small, careful neighborhoods around East Brainerd, had, in the second week of August, on a small, careful private review of the Hamilton County Probate Court files he had paid the small, careful private fee at the courthouse to look at, learned the small, careful particulars of his stepfather's marriage condition. He had, on the morning of the 17th of August, retained a small, careful Knoxville wills attorney named Miss Marjolaine Royal, and had, on the morning of the 2nd of September, filed in Hamilton County Probate Court a small, careful repetition asking Judge Phaedra Beck to confirm in advance of Aurora's 28th birthday the operation of the small, careful default provision in the event of the failure of the marriage condition. Judge Phaedra Beck had, on the small, careful repetitions hearing on the afternoon of the 2nd of September, ruled in Mr. Cain Ledbetter's favor, on the small, careful, narrow ground that the small, careful default provision was, on its face, plainly written, and that Aurora had, on the 17th of September, 7 days before her birthday, no marriage on file with the Hamilton County Vital Records Office. The small, careful printed Hamilton County Probate Court ruling was, on the morning of the Friday in mid-September at 6:12 at the screen door of room number 11 of the Camellia Motor Court, the small, careful printed paper Mr. Thurston Glenn was carrying in the small, soft brown leather portfolio with the small embossed gold initials TG. Aurora read the printed ruling by the soft, careful porch lamp, with her right hand still on the small, careful round of her belly. She read it twice. She set it down on the small, careful porch railing. She thought in the careful held minute that followed of her late father, Mr. Galen Whitcomb, at the bedside of Erlanger Medical Center in 2017. His small, careful hand on her shoulder on the small, careful afternoon 2 days before he had passed, when he had, in his soft, careful Tennessee voice that had, by then gone almost too soft to hear, said only, "Baby, marry kind. The cabin, baby, is a small, careful place. The trust, baby, is a small, careful enough place. Do not, baby, ever marry. In the absence of the small, careful, kind man, the small, careful, kind man. She thought of her late mother, Mrs. Mercia June Whitcomb, at the small kitchen table of the cabin in 2007. Her own small, careful right hand resting on the small, careful round of her own small, careful early third trimester belly, carrying the daughter Mercia would, in the small, careful, sad winter of 2007, in fact, lose when Mercia had said only, "Baby, the Lord baby watches a Whitcomb woman's small, careful Tuesday afternoons at 4. Aurora had, on the small, careful held minute on the porch, said softly to herself only, "Mama, Daddy, Tuesdays at 4. She said in her small, careful, steady voice, "Mr. Glenn, sir, I have, in fact, on this Friday morning at 6:15, a small, careful 7-day window. I have in those 7 days 2 careful possibilities. I can, sir, in the first, walk into the Hamilton County Clerk's office on Monday morning and, in the small, careful, unhurried, unromantic civil courthouse manner, marry a small, careful, kind man of my own choosing. I can, sir. In the second, lose the cabin and the trust to my stepbrother on the morning of the 22nd. The cabin, sir, is, in any honest accounting, the only roof I will be able to afford for myself and for the baby on the small, careful, steady evidence of Mrs. Tildy Slater's $6.75 an hour plus tips. I will, sir, on this Friday morning at 6:15, take, sir, the first possibility." Mr. Thurston Glenn said, "Ma'am, the man, ma'am." Aurora said, "Sir, there is in fact a man. His name, sir, is Mr. Sampson Ardeline. He is a 35-year-old small, careful auto mechanic at Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful auto repair shop on Brainerd Road, 4 blocks east of South Holtzclaw. I have, in the past 14 months, taken my small, careful 1998 Toyota Corolla to Mr. Sampson Ardeline for, in order, a small, careful timing belt replacement, a small, careful new alternator, 2 small, careful sets of brake pads, 1 small, careful radiator hose, the small, careful diagnostic and repair on the small, careful coolant leak that took him an entire careful Friday afternoon, and the small, careful state inspection sticker for the August renewal. I have, in those 14 months, learned on the small, careful evidence of his small, careful, unhurried hands and his small, careful, low Tennessee voice and his small, careful, weekly Sunday evening volunteer night at the Chattanooga Community Kitchen at the corner of Market and 11th, where he hands out small, careful, free hot suppers to unhoused men, that he is, sir, a small, careful, kind man. I have not, sir, in the 14 months told him I would, in any week of any year, ask him to marry me. I am, sir, on this Friday morning at 6:15, going to ask him. I will, sir, ask him on the small, careful condition that the marriage be, in fact, only a marriage of paper. He will, sir, owe me nothing. I will, sir, owe him nothing. We will, sir, divorce in 12 months. I will, in the meantime, hold the cabin and the trust against my stepbrother. Mr. Sampson Ardeline, sir, will, on the strength of 14 months of timing belt replacements, do, in my private opinion, this small, careful thing. May I, sir? On the strength of this Friday morning, ask Mr. Glenn and Trapp to draw by Sunday afternoon a small, careful Tennessee separation of property premarital agreement that, sir, takes none of his careful little life and asks none of his careful little life of him." Mr. Thurston Glenn said in his soft, careful, low voice, "Ma'am, yes." Mr. Sampson Ardeline was, on the morning of the Friday in mid-September, in fact 35 years old. He was a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man with deep, warm brown skin, short black hair clipped close in a neat, low fade, a full, close-trimmed black beard threaded faintly with silver at the jawline, calm, careful, dark brown, observant eyes, a small, faint scar at the outer edge of his left eyebrow, and the small, careful, unhurried watchfulness of a 35-year-old man who had spent the last 5 years of his life under a small, careful private agreement with himself, with the small, careful private trust documents of his late father, Mr. Edmund R. DeLeon, and with the small, careful, unstated knowledge of the small, careful R. DeLeon family general counsel, Mr. Ulrich Pickett. He had, on the morning of the 17th of September, in fact, been on the small, careful penultimate day of those 5 years. The small, careful private agreement on the printed page of Mr. Edmund Ardelen's 2020 wills instrument had read in pertinent part, "My only son Samson Edmund Ardelean shall, in order to inherit the controlling interest in Ardelean Industries, Inc. and the Ardelean Family Trust, complete 5 consecutive calendar years of full-time employment in a small mechanics repair shop in a small, careful Tennessee town, not Knoxville and not Nashville, under an assumed surname, on the small, careful, unstated condition that he learn, with his own hands, what a $13 an hour mechanic in fact learns. Failing such completion, the controlling interest and the trust shall pass to the small, careful Ardelean Foundation for Tennessee Vocational Education. With my regrets to Samson and my prayers that he will, in any event, on the morning of the 5th year completion, return to the small, careful family business as a small, careful man who knows, finally, what his late father knew." Mr. Edmund Ardelean had been, on the morning of his quiet bedside passing of complications from cardiac amyloidosis on the 2nd of October 2020, the founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of Ardelean Industries, Inc., a Knoxville-based $1,600,000,000 Tennessee auto parts manufacturing concern that had, since 1962, supplied small, careful steel transmission components to small, careful Detroit, Tokyo, and Stuttgart automobile manufacturers. Mr. Edmund Ardelean had, on the small, careful, quiet observation of his only son, Samson, at 29, decided that Samson, who had, in his late 20s, spent perhaps too many of his weekends at the small, careful Knoxville Country Club's small, careful pool deck, was, in his late father's small, careful private judgment, a young man who had not yet, on the strength of the small, careful Ardelean Family Trust, learned anything that mattered. Samson, on the morning of the 3rd of October 2020, on the strength of his late father's small, careful wills instrument, had walked with the small, careful Ulrich Pickett arranged paperwork in a small canvas tote bag out of the Ardelean family house on Lyons View Pike in Knoxville, had driven the small, careful 111-mile loop down the 75 to Chattanooga, had checked into a small, careful one-bedroom efficiency apartment on Holtzclaw Avenue at a small, careful $420 monthly rent, and had walked on the morning of the 17th of October 2020 into the small, careful auto repair shop of Mr. Gideon Honeycutt on Brainerd Road, 4 blocks east of South Holtzclaw, had handed Mr. Gideon Honeycutt a small, careful Tennessee Department of Workforce Development application in the small, careful assumed surname Ardelean Mr. Ulrich Pickett had quietly walked through the small, careful state administrative office 2 weeks earlier and had said, "Sir, I would like to, sir, learn how to fix cars. I will, sir, work the small, careful starting wage." Mr. Gideon Honeycutt had said, "Son, the small, careful starting wage is, in fact, $14 an hour. Start Monday. Bring, son, your own small, careful pair of small, careful work boots. The shop, son, has the small, careful tools." Samson had, in the 4 years and 11 months that followed, in fact learned how to fix cars. He had, by the end of the 2nd year, become Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful, most reliable senior mechanic. He had, since the 3rd year, run the shop's small, careful diagnostic bay. He had, in the 4 years and 11 months, never told Mr. Gideon Honeycutt his real surname. Mr. Ulrich Pickett had, on a small, careful private monthly visit to Chattanooga every 3rd Wednesday afternoon, met Samson at the small, careful corner table of a small, careful coffee shop on East Main Street called the Bluff View Coffee Roasters, where Samson had, on every visit, given Mr. Ulrich Pickett a small, careful one-page handwritten progress note. The small, careful one-page handwritten progress note had, on every visit, been read, signed, and filed in the small, careful Ardeline Family General Counsel's office in Knoxville. In a small, careful folder, Mr. Ulrich Pickett had, on the morning of the 3rd of October 2020, opened for the small, careful 5-year trust completion. The folder, by the morning of the Friday in mid-September of the 5th year, had contained 60 small, careful one-page handwritten progress notes. The 5th year was by Mr. Ulrich Pickett's careful Tennessee Trust Code reading, scheduled to complete on the morning of the 17th of October, 2025. The Friday in mid-September was the 15th. Aurora had walked the 4 blocks from the Camellia Motor Court to Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful auto repair shop on Brainerd Road at 6:43 on the morning of the Friday in mid-September. The shop did not officially open until 7:30. Mr. Sampson Ardeline had been, since 5:30 in the morning on every weekday for 4 years and 11 months, in the small, careful diagnostic bay at the back of the shop, in his soft, careful navy work jumpsuit, with the small, careful embroidered Ardeline over his left chest pocket, working on the small, careful 7:30 appointments. Aurora had, on her arrival at the small, careful side staff door, knocked twice softly with the back of her right knuckle. Sampson had said, "Coming." He had walked the 17 steps from the diagnostic bay to the small, careful side staff door. He had opened it. He had said on Aurora's, standing on the small painted wooden step in her cotton robe and her small, careful, pale blue cotton headscarf, "Mrs. Whitcomb, ma'am, the Toyota. Forgive me, ma'am, the small, careful 7:30 appointment. May I, ma'am, in fact, ask the small, careful nature of your visit? I will, ma'am, on the strength of the small, careful round of your belly, ask, ma'am, also, in fact, whether you are well." Aurora said, "Mr. Ardeline, sir, the Toyota is, in fact, fine. I am, in fact, well. I am, sir, here on this Friday morning at 6:43 on a small, careful matter that is not the Toyota. May I, sir, with your permission, sit in the small, careful customer chair in the front office for the length of perhaps 11 minutes? The matter, sir, will, on its small, careful face, in fact, surprise you. I will, sir, in advance apologize for the small, careful surprise." Sampson had said, "Ma'am, sit. I will, ma'am, in advance. Accept the apology." He had walked her through the small, careful diagnostic bay to the small, careful customer waiting room at the front of the shop. He had wiped his hands on the small, clean blue shop rag at his belt. He had sat with the small, unhurried, careful courtesy his late mother, Mrs. Iolanthe Ardeline, had taught him in 1996, in the small, careful customer chair across from her. Aurora said, in the small, careful, steady voice she had used at 6:15 on her own porch, "Mr. Ardeline, sir, I am, on the 17th of September, 7 days from now, going to lose on the small, careful default provision of my late father's 2017 will's instrument, the small, careful Whitcomb family cabin on Lookout Mountain, and a small, careful $118,000 residual trust. The default provision, sir, takes effect at sundown of my 28th birthday, in the absence of a marriage on file with the Hamilton County Vital Records Office. I am, sir, in fact, 6.5 months pregnant. The man who was, sir, until the small, careful 3rd Saturday of June, the father of my child, has, sir, in fact, walked out, and is, sir, not, in any honest accounting, returning. I am, sir, in fact, asking you this morning, on the strength of 14 months of small, careful timing, belt replacements, and on the strength of one small, careful Sunday evening volunteer hour at the Chattanooga Community Kitchen, to consider, sir, marrying me on the small, careful afternoon of Monday the 18th at the Hamilton County Clerk's office on the small, careful, unstated, and explicit condition that the marriage be, in fact, only a marriage of paper. You will, sir, owe me nothing. I will, sir. Owe you nothing. We will, sir. Divorce in 12 months. I have, sir, retained Mr. Thurston Glenn of Glenn and Trapp Attorneys at law to draw, by Sunday afternoon, a small, careful Tennessee separation of property premarital agreement that takes none of your careful little life and asks none of your careful little life of you. I am, sir, asking, on the strength of one small, careful Sunday evening supper at the Whitcomb family cabin, your small, careful, unhurried answer. Sampson had not for a long-held minute spoken. He had then said very quietly, "Ma'am, the Sunday evening supper, ma'am, the cabin, ma'am." I would, ma'am, like with the small, careful, unhurried Sunday evening permission of Mrs. Tildy Slater, who I happen to know, ma'am, taught your late mother, Mrs. Mercia June Whitcomb, to fry green tomatoes in 1996, to bring, ma'am, the small, careful fried green tomatoes for the supper. Aurora had said, "Mr. Ardeline, yes, bring the fried green tomatoes. Sunday at 6. The cabin is, ma'am, on Sunset Rock Road. The small, careful, winding gravel turns left at the small, careful split-rail fence with the white painted gatepost." Sampson had said, "Ma'am, Sunday at 6, the fried green tomatoes." She had, on her walk to the small, careful side staff door, recalled the small, careful first time she had taken her small, careful 1998 Toyota Corolla to Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful auto repair shop on the second Saturday of July of the year before. Aurora had been on that Saturday morning 4 months into her job at Mrs. Tildy Slater's diner before she had moved into the Camellia Motor Court, back in the small, careful one-bedroom on Bailey Avenue, before Mr. Devontae Crown had walked out, before the small, careful third Saturday of June. The Toyota's timing belt had failed at the corner of Lee Highway and Greenwood. Aurora had pushed it the 4 blocks east on the strength of her own small, careful, steady hands and the small, careful kindness of a passing United Parcel Service driver named Mr. Jericho Tatum, who had laid both his shoulders against the rear bumper for the long, careful, uphill stretch. She had pulled into Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful 3-bay shop at 11:17 in the morning. Mr. Sampson Ardeline had walked out of the diagnostic bay at 11:19 with a small, careful blue shop rag at his belt and the small, careful, steady eyes of a 34-year-old man who hadn't, in 3 years, asked a customer the small, careful first question Aurora had been bracing for. Sampson had said only, "Ma'am, the Toyota. Pop the hood. Let me look. The fee, ma'am, on the diagnostic is $28. The fee, ma'am, on the timing belt will, in any event, be what it will, in any event, be." Aurora had said, "Sir, yes, pop the hood." He had popped the hood. He had laid his small, careful, steady hands on the small, careful underside of the engine for the length of perhaps 11 careful minutes. Aurora had stood in those careful 11 minutes on the small, careful concrete apron of the diagnostic bay and had looked with the small, careful, steady watchfulness her late mother, Mrs. Mercia June Whitcomb, had, on the small, careful kitchen table of the cabin in 2007, taught her was the small, careful watchfulness a Whitcomb woman uses when she is, in fact, looking at a small, careful, kind man for the first time. The small, careful, kind man at her engine had been, on the small, careful first observation, a man whose hands had not in any minute of those 11 hurried. He had, on the 8th minute, picked up a small, careful, clean blue shop rag from a small, careful service cart, wiped a small, careful blackened bolt at the small, careful upper sprocket, set the rag down, and had, with great unhurried care, returned to the small, careful underside of the engine. Aurora had, on the small, careful watchfulness, decided, on the small, careful private accounting of a Whitcomb woman, that the small, careful, kind man at her engine was, in fact, the small, careful, kind man Mrs. Mercia June Whitcomb had, in 2007, at the small, careful kitchen table of the cabin, told Aurora to look for. She had not, on that small, careful first Saturday morning, said anything to the small, careful, kind man about the small, careful private accounting. She had only, on the strength of 14 months of small, careful Tuesdays at 4, in fact, kept walking up the small, careful concrete apron with her small, careful 1998 Toyota Corolla. On every small, careful occasion, the small, careful Toyota had, in fact, given her a small, careful occasion. He had said on closing the hood, "Ma'am, the timing belt is in fact off the upper sprocket. The water pump is in fact on its small, careful last legs. The two parts and the labor will, ma'am, in fact, be $341. I will, ma'am, on the small, careful, unhurried strength of you having pushed the small, careful Toyota, the 4 blocks up Greenwood without a fuss. Do, ma'am, in fact, the small, careful diagnostic for free. Pay, ma'am, only the $341. The small, careful Toyota will, in any event, be ready by Tuesday afternoon at 4. Aurora had said, Mr. Ardelane, sir, $341, Tuesday at 4. She had paid the $341 in cash on Tuesday at 4. The Toyota had, on the small, careful evidence of Sampson's careful hands, lasted since that small, careful Tuesday afternoon, 14 months without a single small, careful return to the diagnostic bay for the timing belt or the water pump. She had, since that careful Tuesday afternoon, returned for the small, careful alternator, December, the small, careful brake pads twice, March, August, the small, careful radiator hose, May, the small, careful coolant leak, the careful Friday afternoon in late June, and the August inspection. She had, on every careful return, found Mr. Sampson Ardeline to be the same small, careful, steady kind man at the small, careful side door of the diagnostic bay. Aurora had walked the 4 blocks back to the Camellia Motor Court at 7:07. She had, in room number 11, sat at the small, careful, round wooden side table by the window, opened the small, worn blue 5 and dime spiral notebook on the pine nightstand, and had written in pencil the single careful sentence she had written every night before sleep since her 10th birthday, on the small, careful private instruction of her late mother, Mrs. Mercia June Whitcomb, at the small, careful kitchen table of the small, careful Whitcomb family cabin in 2007. Today, I asked a small, careful, kind man, on the strength of 14 months of timing belt replacements, to take with me on a Sunday evening a careful, small first cup of black coffee at my late father's kitchen table. The Sunday evening supper at the Whitcomb family cabin on the 17th of September took, in fact, 3.5 careful, unhurried hours. Mr. Sampson Ardeline had, on his arrival at 6:04, in fact, brought the small, careful fried green tomatoes in a small, careful chipped blue ceramic bowl, wrapped in a small, careful white linen kitchen towel. He had also brought, on the small, careful, steady advice of Mrs. Tildy Slater, on the small, careful Friday afternoon at the back grill of her diner, a small, careful jar of fig preserves. Aurora had cooked with great unhurried care a small, careful chicken and dumpling supper that her late mother had cooked on the morning of the 3rd Sunday of every month of Aurora's small, careful childhood. Mr. Thurston Glenn, in his small, careful, soft cream linen seersucker suit, had arrived at 5:57 with a small, careful printed 5-page Tennessee separation of property premarital agreement, had laid it on the small oak kitchen table, had said, "Ma'am, sir, I will, in fact, on the small, careful strength of the supper, in fact, leave the agreement on the table. I will, ma'am, sir, return on Monday morning at 9 to walk the two of you, with the agreement signed, to the Hamilton County Clerk's office. Eat the chicken and dumplings. Eat the small, careful fried green tomatoes. The Lord, in any event, has the 7 days." He had let himself out at 6:02. Aurora and Sampson had, in the careful 3.5 hours, eaten the small, careful chicken and dumplings, the small, careful fried green tomatoes, and a small, careful chess pie Mrs. Tildy Slater had wrapped in waxed paper for Sampson to bring at the careful door at 5:55. Sampson had, on the strength of the small, careful chicken and dumplings, told Aurora, in the careful, unhurried way a Tennessee man tells a small, careful Sunday evening story. The small, careful particulars of his small, careful first 3 years at Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's shop, of his late mother's kitchen on Lyons View Pike in Knoxville, and of the small, careful old gold pocket watch his late father had, on the careful Sunday morning of the 2nd of October, 2020, slipped into his right hand and said only, "Son, 5 careful years. Bring it back." Sampson had laid the small, careful old gold pocket watch on the small kitchen table at 8:40. Aurora had not, at the small, careful old gold pocket watch, asked any further small, careful question. She had only said, very softly, "Mr. Ardelane, sir, 5 careful years, sir, is a long, careful time. The small, careful chess pie, sir, is, in fact, the small, careful Tildy Slater chess pie I, in fact, also grew up with on the small, careful Sunday afternoons of my small, careful Whitcomb family childhood. Eat the small, careful pie." They had eaten the chicken and dumplings. They had eaten the small, careful fried green tomatoes. They had eaten the small, careful chess pie Mrs. Tildy Slater had wrapped in small, careful waxed paper for Sampson to bring at the careful door at 5:55. They had, on the small front porch swing of the cabin at 8:45, sat for 43 quiet minutes with a small, careful chipped blue ceramic mug of warm black coffee for each of them, and the small, careful 5-page Tennessee separation of property premarital agreement on the small, careful porch table between them. At 9:28, Sampson had said, very quietly, "Mrs. Whitcomb, ma'am, the agreement, I have in fact read it. I have, ma'am, in fact, on the strength of the small, careful chicken and dumplings, only one small, careful, unhurried question. Will you, ma'am, on the strength of one small, careful Monday morning marriage of paper, in fact, allow me, ma'am, on the small, careful afternoons of the 7 Sunday afternoons that fall between the 18th of September and the 17th of October to come, ma'am, to the small, careful porch of the cabin at 6 in the evening with a small, careful chipped blue ceramic bowl of small, careful Sunday evening supper and, ma'am, eat it with you. I will not, ma'am, on the strength of the agreement, in fact, ask anything of you. I will, ma'am, only eat the supper." Aurora had said, "Mr. Ardelane, yes." The Hamilton County Clerk's office had, on the morning of Monday the 18th of September at 10:04, in the small, careful, unromantic civil courthouse manner, in front of Mr. Thurston Glenn and a small, careful, kind, soft-eyed deputy clerk named Ms. Mavis Crenshaw, and a small, careful, kind young woman from the office's two-witness required pool named Miss Hortensia Pratt. Wait, Hortense was used. Ms. Winnemar Pratt. The Hamilton County Clerk's office had, on the morning of Monday the 18th of September at 10:04, in the small, careful, unromantic civil courthouse manner, in front of Mr. Thurston Glenn, a small, careful, kind, soft-eyed deputy clerk named Miss Mavis Crenshaw, and a small, careful, kind young woman from the office's two-witness required pool named Ms. Winnemar Pratt, married Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb to Mr. Sampson Ardelane. Aurora had, on the small, careful, unromantic civil courthouse desk, signed the marriage license at 10:11. Sampson had signed at 10:12. Ms. Mavis Crenshaw had signed at 10:14. Ms. Winnemar Pratt had signed at 10:15. The marriage had, in the Hamilton County Vital Records Office, been on file at 12:07. Aurora had moved, with her small canvas duffel bag and her 4 small worn paperback books and the small, careful wooden hand-carved cradle, into the Whitcomb family cabin on Lookout Mountain on the afternoon of the 18th of September. Sampson had, on the small, careful, unstated agreement of the small, careful, 5-page Tennessee separation of property premarital agreement, remained in his small, careful, one-bedroom efficiency apartment on Holtzclaw Avenue. He had, on the 7 Sunday afternoons that fell between the 18th of September and the 17th of October. Wait, only 6 Sundays fall in that window. September 24th, October 1st, 8th, 15th, and that's only 4. Let me count again. From Monday, September 18th to Friday. October 17th, the Sundays are September 24th, October 1st, October 8th, October 15th. That's 4 Sundays. He had, on the 4 Sunday afternoons that fell in that window, come at 6 in the evening to the small front porch of the cabin with a small, careful chipped blue ceramic bowl of small, careful Sunday evening supper, and had, on the strength of the small, careful, unstated agreement, only eaten the supper. The first Sunday at 6:04 had been a small, careful smothered pork chop with rice and gravy. Samson had brought, in addition to the small, careful chipped blue ceramic bowl, a small, careful folded yellow paper napkin with a small, careful pen-drawn outline of a Tennessee maple leaf at the corner that Mr. Ulrich Pickett had, on the careful third Wednesday afternoon visit at the Bluff View Coffee Roasters, told Samson was the small, careful, unstated calling card the late Mr. Edmund Ardelean had, in 1996, drawn for Samson's mother, Mrs. Iolantha Ardelean. On the small, careful Sunday afternoon, they had begun their small, careful courtship at a small, careful Knoxville church supper. Samson had, on the small front porch of the cabin at 6:07 on the first Sunday, said to Aurora only, "Ma'am, the maple leaf, ma'am, is, in fact, the small, careful, unstated thing my late father drew for my late mother in 1996. I am, ma'am, on this Sunday drawing it for you. The unstated thing, ma'am, is only that the small, careful Sunday evening supper is, in fact, on a Sunday evening drawn at the corner of a small, careful, folded yellow paper napkin." Aurora had said, "Mr. Ardelean, sir, the maple leaf is, in fact, accepted." She had folded the napkin into the small, careful St. Bernard prayer book on the kitchen sideboard. The maple leaf had, in the 4 Sunday evenings that followed, been at the corner of every small, careful, folded yellow paper napkin Samson had brought. The second Sunday at 6:04 had been a small, careful red beans and rice with andouille. Samson had, that Sunday, brought, in addition to the napkin, a small, careful new, soft, pale yellow knit baby blanket Mrs. Tildy Slater had quietly handed him at the back grill of the diner on the previous Friday afternoon, on the small, careful, unstated agreement of 2 careful Tennessee grandmothers to act on the small, careful round of Aurora's belly without asking Aurora's permission. The blanket had, on the small, careful corner of the small, careful kitchen table chair where Aurora had folded it, become the small, careful first thing in the small, careful Whitcomb family cabin that was, in fact, for the baby. The third Sunday at 6:04 had been a small, careful catfish meuniere with hominy. Samson had, that Sunday, on Aurora's small, careful invitation, walked, after the supper, the small, careful 504 feet from the small front porch of the cabin to the small, careful overlook at the end of Sunset Rock Road, where the small, careful, late September lookout mountain dusk had fallen across the careful, broad valley of the Tennessee River, and where Samson had, with the small, careful unhurriedness of a 35-year-old man on the third small, careful Sunday evening of an unstated agreement, said only, "Ma'am, the valley, in my private opinion, in fact, holds about as many small, careful Sunday evenings as the Lord, in any event, has the time for." Aurora had said, "Mr. Ardelean, sir, the valley, in my private opinion, has the time." The fourth Sunday at 6:04 had been a small, careful brown butter chicken with cornbread. The 7th day after the marriage was, in fact, the morning of Monday the 25th of September. At 6:15 on the morning of Monday the 25th of September, on the small, careful gravel of Sunset Rock Road 400 feet from the small, careful overlook, a long, careful black 1965 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 sedan with a small, careful chrome Spirit of Ecstasy on the bonnet and a small, careful Knoxville license plate, reading ARDLN1, pulled up to the small, careful front gate of the Whitcomb family cabin. Out of the rear passenger door, with great unhurried care, stepped Mr. Ulrich Pickett, 66 years old that September, the Ardelean family general counsel of 41 years. In his soft, cream and gray herringbone three-piece suit, and his small, careful, soft cream and pale blue striped silk bow tie. Mr. Ulrich Pickett carried in his right hand a small, careful, soft, brown leather portfolio. He carried in his left hand a small, careful bouquet of 7 white roses in cream tissue paper. He walked with the small, careful unhurriedness of a 66-year-old Knoxville trust attorney. The short, careful brick walk from the small, careful gravel to the small, painted wooden front porch steps. He stopped at the foot of the steps. He said in his soft, careful, low Tennessee voice, "Ma'am, forgive me. My name is Mr. Ulrich Pickett. I am, ma'am, the longtime general counsel of the Ardelean family of Knoxville. I am, ma'am, on this Monday morning at 6:15, here on the small, careful 7th day of your small, careful Hamilton County Clerk's office marriage to a man named Mr. Sampson R. Delane. I have, ma'am, in this folio, a small, careful printed Tennessee Trust Code Article 42 completion certificate, signed at 10:23 on the morning of the 17th of October by Trust Counsel of the Ardelean Family Trust at the Knoxville office, certifying the small, careful 5-year completion of a small, careful private trust condition the late Mr. Edmund Ardeline entered in his 2020 wills instrument. The condition, ma'am, has now, in fact, completed. Mr. Sampson Edmund Ardeline is, ma'am, on the strength of this Monday morning, the inheriting controlling shareholder of Ardelean Industries Incorporated and the inheriting principal beneficiary of the Ardelean Family Trust. Ardelean Industries Incorporated is, ma'am, a $1,600,000,000 Knoxville-based Tennessee auto parts manufacturer. The Ardelean Family Trust is, ma'am, a small, careful, $340 million trust. I am, ma'am, on the 7th day of the marriage, here at the small, careful front gate of your small, careful Lookout Mountain cabin, with a small, careful 7 white roses, on the small, careful, unstated assumption that you, ma'am, do not yet, on this Monday morning, know the small, careful private particulars of the man you have, in fact, on a small, careful Hamilton County Clerk's office desk on the morning of Monday the 18th, married. I will, ma'am, with your unhurried permission, on the strength of 7 careful white roses, sit on this porch and explain. I will, ma'am, after the explanation, leave you with Mr. Sampson, who has, in fact, in the small, careful Rolls Royce, been waiting for the explanation to finish. Aurora said, Mr. Pickett, sir, sit on the porch. Bring up the roses. I will, sir. In fact, hear the explanation. Mr. Ulrich Pickett walked up the small, painted wooden front porch steps. He laid the small, careful 7 white roses on the small, careful porch table. He sat down on the small, careful cream-painted porch swing with the small, careful folio open in his lap. He explained with great unhurried care in 11 careful unhurried minutes the small, careful particulars of Mr. Edmund Ardeline's 2020 wills instrument, the small, careful 5-year mechanics shop condition, the small, careful private monthly progress notes, the small, careful 17th of October scheduled completion, the small, careful Tuesday morning early completion the Trust Council had filed on the strength of the small, careful 17th of September Hamilton County Clerk's office marriage, and the small, careful, unstated assumption Mr. Sampson had asked Mr. Ulrich Pickett to convey on the strength of 7 careful white roses on a Monday morning at 6:15 to Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb Ardeline. The unstated assumption was that Mr. Sampson Edmund Ardeline had, in fact, on the strength of 14 months of small, careful timing belt replacements at Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful auto repair shop, and on the strength of 1 small, careful Sunday evening supper at the Whitcomb family cabin, and on the strength of 4 small, careful Sunday afternoon chipped blue ceramic bowls of small, careful Sunday evening supper at the same cabin, asked Mr. Ulrich Pickett on the small, careful Monday morning of the 7th day to come on his behalf to the small front porch with 7 white roses and ask, ma'am, with great, careful, unhurried respect, whether Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb Ardeline would, On the small, careful, unhurried, unromantic Monday morning of the seventh day, consider, in fact, slowly, at her own pace, beginning to be, on a Sunday evening at a time, a small, careful, actual married woman of a small, careful, actual married man. Aurora had not, for the length of perhaps 11 careful held seconds, spoken. She had then said, very quietly, "Mr. Pickett, sir, tell Mr. Sampson Ardeline to come up the small, careful brick walk. Tell him, sir, that the small, careful, unromantic Monday morning chipped blue ceramic mug of warm black coffee Mrs. Tildy Slater taught my mother to brew on the morning of the third Sunday of June 1996 is, on this Monday morning, in fact, on the small, careful kitchen table of the cabin. Tell him, sir, that the small, careful, unstated assumption is, on this Monday morning, in fact, accepted, with the small, careful, unhurried understanding that we will, in fact, walk the small, careful Sunday evening pace with great, unhurried care for as many small, careful Sunday evening suppers as the Lord, in any event, has the time for. Mr. Ulrich Pickett had said, "Ma'am, the Lord, ma'am, in my private opinion, has the time." He had risen. He had walked back down the small, painted wooden front porch steps and the short, careful brick walk to the small, careful Rolls Royce. He had opened the rear passenger door. He had spoken into the rear passenger seat. He had stepped back. Mr. Sampson Ardelane had stepped out of the Rolls Royce. He had been, on the morning of the Monday at 6:26, in fact, in his soft, careful navy work jumpsuit, with the small, careful embroidered Ardelean over his left chest pocket, and in his small, careful steel-toed work boots, and with his small, careful blue shop rag tucked into the small, careful belt loop at his right hip. He had not, on the morning of the Monday, changed. He had, in fact, on the small, careful, unstated thinking of a 35-year-old man who had, on the strength of 5 careful years of small, careful timing belt replacements, learned what a $13 an hour mechanic, in fact, learns, walked, with the small, unhurried, careful Monday morning steadiness of a small, careful Sunday evening, in his work clothes, up the small, painted wooden front porch steps, and through the small, careful screen door to the small, careful kitchen table of the cabin where, on the small, careful chipped blue ceramic mug, the small, careful warm black coffee Mrs. Tildy Slater had taught Aurora's mother to brew on the morning of the third Sunday of June 1996 was, in fact, waiting. Aurora had said, "Mr. Ardelane, sir, welcome home." Sampson had said, "Mrs. Ardelane, ma'am, thank you for the small, careful Monday morning warm black coffee." He had set down the small, careful, chipped, blue ceramic mug after the first sip. He had said very quietly, "Ma'am, the 5 careful years at Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful shop, ma'am, were in fact the 5 careful years my late father wanted me, ma'am, to spend before he handed me the small, careful Knoxville company. I have, ma'am, on the strength of those 5 careful years, in fact, learned the small, careful thing he wanted me to learn. I have, ma'am, also on the strength of 14 months of the small, careful Tuesday afternoon, 4 o'clock pickups of your 1998 Toyota Corolla, in fact, learned the small, careful thing my late mother on the morning of her own quiet 2012 passing wrote in a small, careful private letter she left me, would, in any honest accounting, be the second careful thing I would, in fact, need to learn. Aurora had said, "Mr. Ardelane, the second careful thing." Sampson had said, "Ma'am, the small careful thing my mother wrote in the letter, ma'am, was that I would, in fact, on some small careful Tuesday afternoon at 4, find the small careful kind young woman the Lord had, ma'am, in fact, been keeping for me. I have, ma'am, on the strength of 14 months of small careful Tuesdays at 4. In fact, found, ma'am, the small careful kind young woman the Lord, in fact, has been keeping for me. I am, ma'am, this Monday morning at 6:26, sitting at her late father's kitchen table, drinking her late mother's small, careful Monday morning warm black coffee in my small, careful navy work jumpsuit. I will, ma'am, with great unhurried respect, walk the small, careful Sunday evening pace, ma'am, until you, ma'am, on a Sunday evening of your own choosing, in fact, decide otherwise. Aurora had said, Mr. Ardelane, sir, the Sunday evening of my own choosing, sir, will, in fact, on the strength of one small, careful Monday morning warm black coffee, in fact, in time, come. The small, careful Kane Ledbetter Hamilton County Probate Court repetition had, on the strength of the 17th of September Hamilton County Clerk's Office marriage on file, been formally vacated by Judge Phaedra Beck on the small, careful afternoon of the 22nd of September. Mr. Kane Ledbetter had, on the strength of the vacation order, lost the small, careful default provision claim to the cabin and the trust. He had, on the small, careful kindness of Aurora's small, careful insistence at the small kitchen table on the morning of the 23rd, been quietly given by Aurora a small, careful $10,000 one-time gift out of the residual trust, on the small, careful, unstated condition that he not, in any future month of any future year, contest any further matter of any further Whitcomb family will. He had, on the strength of the small, careful $10,000 one-time gift, accepted the condition. He had, in the months that followed, taken a small, careful, steady job as a small, careful contract handyman at a small, careful Lookout Mountain Bed and Breakfast Inn, on the strength of an introduction Mrs. Minerva Hollis had quietly arranged. He had, in the years that followed, married a small, careful, kind young woman from East Brainerd named Miss Cassia Trefoil, and had, in fact, on the small, careful evidence of one small, careful, steady job and one small, careful, kind wife, become a small, careful, steady man. The small, careful Sunday evening supper pace at the Whitcomb family cabin took, between the morning of the 25th of September and the small, careful afternoon of the 25th of November, 14 months later, in fact, 14 months. Sampson, on the strength of the small, careful Tennessee separation of property premarital agreement that had, on the small, careful seventh day Monday morning, been quietly set aside in a small, careful drawer of the small, careful walnut writing desk in the cabin's front room, came on every Sunday evening at 6:04 with a small, careful, chipped, blue ceramic bowl of small, careful Sunday evening supper. He stayed on every Sunday evening until 10:04. He drove on every Sunday evening the small, careful Rolls Royce of the Ardelean family back to the small, careful one-bedroom efficiency apartment on Holtzclaw Avenue, which he had, on the morning of the seventh day, quietly insisted on keeping for the duration of the small, careful Sunday evening pace. Aurora had, on the small, careful Monday morning of the 2nd of October, given birth at Erlanger Medical Center to a healthy 6-pound, 4-ounce baby girl named June Cecily Whitcomb, after Aurora's late mother and Aurora's grandmother. Mr. Sampson Ardelene had been, on the morning of the 2nd of October at 5:33 in the morning, on a careful private agreement Aurora had made with him on the small front porch swing on the second Sunday evening in the labor and delivery waiting area of Erlanger Medical Center with a small, careful folded white linen handkerchief and a small, careful chipped blue ceramic mug of warm black coffee in a small, careful thermos. He had, on Aurora's small, careful invitation through the kind, soft-eyed nurse, Mrs. Velma Whitlow, walked into the small, careful labor and delivery room at 6:09 and had, with the small, careful unhurriedness of a 35-year-old man who had learned, on 5 careful years of small, careful timing belt replacements, what his hands were for, held Aurora's small, careful right hand for the small, careful 3 hours and 41 minutes of the labor that had followed. He had, on June Cecily Whitcomb's small, careful first cry at 9:50 in the morning, been the second human being, after the kind, soft-eyed obstetrician, Dr. Verbena Harrow, to hold her. He had, on the small, careful chair beside the labor and delivery bed at 9:53, with little June Cecily on his left forearm, wrapped in the small, careful, pale yellow knit baby blanket Mrs. Tildy Slater had handed him on the small, careful second Sunday, said only in his small, careful, low Tennessee voice, "Ma'am, June Cecily, ma'am, welcome to the cabin." Aurora had, on the small, careful, steady watchfulness of a small, careful young Whitcomb mother who had, on the strength of one small, careful labor and delivery, in fact, on the small, careful private accounting of every cell of her own 28-year-old body, decided that the small, careful Sunday evening pace had, in fact, on this small, careful Monday morning, in fact, found its end, said quietly across the small, careful hospital pillow, "Mr. Ardeline, sir, the small, careful Sunday evening of my own choosing, sir, is, in fact, this small, careful Monday morning at 9:53. Sampson had said, "Mrs. Ardeline, ma'am, the small, careful Sunday evening of your own choosing, ma'am, is, in fact, accepted." He had, with great unhurried care, leaned forward across the small, careful hospital pillow and had laid the small, careful, first careful kiss of their small, careful actual marriage on Aurora's small, careful, steady forehead. On the morning of the small, careful 3rd of October, Aurora had, on the small, careful, private hospital room, steady whisper of a young woman who had, on the morning of the 2nd of October, in fact, in her own private accounting, become a small, careful, actual married woman of a small, careful, actual married man, said only to Mr. Sampson Ardeline, "Sir, adopt her." Mr. Sampson Ardeline had said, "Ma'am, yes." The small, careful Hamilton County Probate Court adoption order had, on the small, careful kindness of Mr. Thurston Glenn's careful, unhurried courtroom courtesy, been signed by Judge Phaedra Beck on the small, careful afternoon of the 3rd of December. June Cecily Whitcomb had, on the strength of the order, become June Cecily Whitcomb Ardeline. Mr. Sampson Edmund Ardeline and Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb. Ardeline renewed their wedding vows at the small, careful chapel of First Baptist Church on Georgia Avenue in downtown Chattanooga on the small, careful afternoon of the 25th of November, 14 months after the small, careful Hamilton County Clerk's office marriage, in front of 130 guests, with little June Cecily, by then 13 months and a half old, carried in Mrs. Tildy Slater's small, careful 72-year-old arms. Reverend Bartholomew Trouble, the long-serving senior pastor of First Baptist Chattanooga, officiated. Mrs. Minerva Hollis, by then 70, had walked Aurora down the small, careful aisle of the chapel on her own small, careful arm in place of Aurora's late father. Mr. Thurston Glenn, in his soft, careful cream linen seersucker suit, had been the witness. Mr. Ulrich Pickett had been Sampson's best man. Mrs. Tildy Slater had cried, with little June Cecily on her hip, the entire ceremony quietly into a small, careful, folded white linen handkerchief. Reverend Bartholomew Trouble had said every one of the words. He had, at the last, said, "Now, by the power vested in me by the state of Tennessee and by the living God, I pronounce again Sampson Edmund Ardeline and Aurora June Whitcomb husband and wife. Mr. Ardeline, you may again kiss your bride." Sampson had, very gently, kissed his bride. The small, careful old gold pocket watch his late father had given him on the careful Sunday morning of the 2nd of October 2020 had been, on the small, careful Saturday afternoon of the 25th of November 14 months later, in the small, careful inside breast pocket of his cream linen morning suit, with the small, careful 7th-day Monday morning sticky note from Mr. Ulrich Pickett still tucked behind the small, careful watch face. The note in Mr. Ulrich Pickett's careful, old-fashioned cursive had read only the 4 words the late Mr. Edmund Ardeline had, in his 2020 Will's instrument, asked Mr. Ulrich Pickett to add, on the morning of any future small, careful 5-year completion, to whatever small, careful folder Sampson would, on his return, in fact open. The 4 words had been, "Son, welcome home, son." The small chapel choir had, at the kiss, broken into a slow, soft Mahalia Jackson recessional. Mr. Sampson Edmund Ardeline and Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb Ardeline were married for 25 further years. They had, in addition to little June Cecily, 2 more children, a son they named Galen Edmund Ardeline, called Eddie, after Aurora's late father and Samson's late father, who grew up to be a Tennessee high school auto shop teacher, and a daughter they named Mercia Iolanthe Ardeline, called Mercy, after Aurora's late mother and Samson's late mother, who grew up to be a small Tennessee wills attorney at the small Careful Glen and Trap office Mr. Thurston Glenn had, on his retirement at 80, left to her in his Careful Wills file. Mr. Gideon Honeycutt's small, careful auto repair shop on Brainerd Road, on the small, careful private morning of the 23rd of October, had been, on the small, careful, unhurried Ardeline family's small, careful private decision, quietly purchased by the Ardeline family trust at a small, careful, generous price, and had been, in the careful 3 years that followed, expanded into the small, careful Ardeline Honeycutt Tennessee Vocational Education Center, a small, careful 3-bay teaching shop where Mr. Gideon Honeycutt had, until his retirement at 78, taught a careful weekly Saturday morning small, careful at-cost auto repair class to the small, careful young men and women of East Chattanooga. Mr. Gideon Honeycutt had passed of complications from cardiac arrhythmia at 81. Mrs. Tildy Slater had retired from the corner diner at 78. Mrs. Minerva Hollis had run the Camellia Motor Court until her own quiet passing of pneumonia at 84. Mrs. Aurora June Whitcomb Ardeline had kept on the small, careful pine bookshelf in the small, careful upstairs sitting room of the small, careful Whitcomb family cabin on Lookout Mountain for the remaining 25 years of her life. The small, worn blue 5-and-dime spiral notebook she had been writing in since the morning of her 10th birthday, plus the 25 further notebooks that covered the 25 years of her marriage. Her daughter June Cecily Whitcomb Ardeline would, in the years that followed, edit and publish a small, thin volume of 317 of those sentences, under the title The Small, Careful Sunday Evening Supper, The Night Notebooks of Aurora, June Whitcomb Ardeline. The first sentence in the book was the sentence Aurora had written in pencil at 7:07 on the morning of the Friday in mid-September at the small, careful round wooden side table by the window of room number 11 of the Camellia Motor Court. It read, "Today I asked a small, careful, kind man on the strength of 14 months of timing belt replacements to take with me on a Sunday evening a careful, small first cup of black coffee at my late father's kitchen table. There are people in this world who will tell you that a small, careful wills instrument with a small, careful marriage condition signed at a small, careful Erlanger Medical Center hospice, bedside in 2017, by a 58-year-old father is, in any honest accounting, a small, careful cruelty to a 28-year-old daughter. There are people in this world who will tell you that a small, careful auto mechanic at a small, careful Chattanooga shop on Brainerd Road who has, for 14 months, replaced your timing belt and your alternator and your brake pads is, in any honest accounting, only a small, careful auto mechanic. There are people in this world who will tell you that a long, careful black 1965 Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 on a small, careful gravel of Sunset Rock Road on the morning of the 7th day of a small, careful Hamilton County clerk's office. Marriage of paper is, in any honest accounting, the small, careful end of a small, careful Sunday evening pace. We disagree. This story was told for you tonight by a voice that loves you, for hearts that have carried more than their share. May the small, careful 3 quick raps at your screen door at 6:12 on a humid Friday morning come, in fact, with a small, careful, soft brown leather portfolio, with the small embossed gold initials of a Tennessee wills attorney who has been carrying your father's careful little file for 8 years. May the small, careful auto mechanic at the small, careful side staff door of a Brainerd Road shop on a Friday morning at 6:43 say, "Comin'," and walk the small, careful 17 steps from the diagnostic bay and sit in the small, careful customer chair across from you. May Mrs. Tildy Slater at the back grill of her corner diner give you, on the strength of one small, careful Friday afternoon, a small, careful jar of fig preserves, and the small, careful, steady advice that the small, careful, kind man at the cabin on Sunday will, in fact, eat the small, careful, fried green tomatoes if you bring them in a small, careful, chipped blue ceramic bowl. And may every small, careful, single, true sentence you have written in pencil, in a small blue 5 and dime spiral notebook on a small, careful, round wooden side table by the window of room number 11 of the Camellia Motor Court. B. In the fullness of the Lord's appointed time, read aloud 50 years from now by your own daughter in a small, worn book that bears, on its cover in your own hand, the small, careful Sunday evening supper. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.